Good afternoon. Welcome to another A-Push video with Mr. Paid For. Today we're looking at the Mexican-American War. And the first thing we need to do is look at our essential question of the day. Why did Polk's decisions in Oregon and Mexico increase sectionalism? By the time we're done here, you're going to know the answer to that. Let's go ahead and get started looking at Polk's platform. Polk's platform, hopefully there's one phrase that comes to your mind right off the bat, and that is 54-40 or fight. So what is this really talking about, this 54-40 or fight? Polk's platform, of course, is an expansion platform. People had used to think, based on surveying done in the early 1800s, that this was the Great American Desert and this land was worthless and not arable. You couldn't farm it, so why would you want it? So now people have discovered that this land is actually great. And by the time you get to the 1840s, where we are at with the Mexican-American War, people have a great interest in moving out to Oregon, knowing it's fertile farmland and it's great land for growing things. And likewise, people have begun settling down in what is going to become California. So Texas has become its own republic, and it's not, well, by the time it becomes the beginning of the Mexican-American War, it's essentially going to be annexed in just before that. And this is something John Tyler does in his waning days. So what we're going to see is Northerners are going to have aspirations of getting all of Oregon country. Now you might say, why all of Oregon country? Because originally what had happened over 20 years before is the United States agreed to have the 49th parallel come all the way out to the border of Oregon country and to freeze out the Russians in Alaska, that basically the British and Americans agreed to mutually settle this for 20 years and see what would happen. Well, now 20 years has passed, and you have basically the British and the Americans have settled some people, although far more for the Americans, and you basically have a dispute over Washington, kind of what's going to happen with that. Well, you have Northerners saying this land is fantastic. They want all of 54-40, which goes up to the southern border of Alaska, and they're willing to fight for it. So when Polk says in his campaign address, 54-40 or fight, that's exactly what they're talking about, is getting all of Oregon country. Of course, this is today's British Columbia up here and Vancouver Island. Well, essentially what's going to happen is Polk is going to look at this and say, you know, the other goals he had as part of his platform, I guess, to kind of deal with our bullet point, he wanted to get the disputed territory in Texas. We'll talk more about that later, but he wanted what Texas had claimed and the United States had now annexed. He wanted to get the Rio Grande as the border of Texas, and the Mexicans, begrudgingly, when Texas had gotten, you know, their signed freedom from Santa Anna under duress, they had said the Nueces River. So you have this dispute over what you can see is more than half of Texas. It's a very significant amount of territory. The U.S. has now absorbed Texas, so it's not the Republic of Texas anymore. And now you're seeing a situation where, as a part of the United States, Texas is claiming this, so thus the United States is claiming it. So Polk is saying he wants to pay to end the dispute and get the disputed territory with Texas. He also wants California, which I've got a dotted outline here, and whatever else he can get. So he wants 54-40 or fight, plus all this land here. Well, the northern aspirations were to get all of this land up here, because people know Oregon country is great. This is the northern aspiration. They want all of that. The southern aspiration, however, is to get as much land down here as possible. Now you might say, why does this matter? Because of the Missouri Compromise, which is in about here. Okay? The Missouri Compromise said land out to the west, north of 3630, was going to be free. So the Southerners don't care about this land. Okay? And we're going to see this really in our next video that we do. And the Southerners are going to say, well, if we get more territory out here, this becomes new slave territory, which is going to be important because they know they can grow and use some of the land, but it's also just additional slave states to help slavery endure in their strategy. Polk is from Tennessee. He's a Southerner. So Polk's aspiration is going to be getting this land over here. Okay? He wants anything that's in this area. That's what he's looking for. So what you're going to see is this is Polk's platform. But then Polk is going to get into office, and everyone's all fired up with Manifest Destiny and thinks we should be getting all this land. Polk is going to basically undercut the Northerners, and this starts to really lead to the sectional divide that we're talking about with our essential question. Essentially, he's going to make the Oregon Treaty, and he says, I don't want to fight the British and the Mexicans at the same time. Keep in mind, the United States hasn't invested in a gigantic army at this point. Well, they fight things like the War of 1812 and then draw down the troops again. Okay, so he's going to cut a deal to basically extend the 49th parallel, and I know this really should be totally flat and straight, but this is the map I found, so my apologies. But to draw this line at the 49th parallel out and just extend it, and this would give a chunk of land to the U.S., a chunk of land to Great Britain, and it neatly ties it up. And he can say, well, now you can all settle this area. This is a politically expedient option he chooses. It's a way that he can say, see, I got you something, and now you can settle without any disputes or any problems in the future. The problem is that Northerners, they feel like they're going to get all of this. They feel like they're promised it by 5440 as a campaign slogan, and now they're not getting it. They're angry. And you're going to see them take this out on any attempts to get land in the South. Okay, so the Oregon Treaty gets cut and cuts the boundary out at 49th parallel. So that takes care of the Oregon Treaty. Well, Polk is going to do something now that is going to tick off the Mexicans significantly. Remember, the Americans now consider this disputed territory theirs. But the Mexicans, of course, consider it theirs. It's disputed. But Polk is going to dispatch Zachary Taylor with a number of troops to go down and build in the disputed territory a fort and set up camp there and basically just occupy that area. Well, this provokes Santa Anna, who's a hothead and a brash guy, and he's brashly going to come up and launch an attack and kill some of the Americans. Now, the United States provokes them, they do the attacking, and you know what happens. Polk is going to go before Congress and say they shed American blood on American soil, and when he says this, essentially, he's going to be able to get Congress to support him. Now, not all of Congress. Some of Congress is going to be looking at the Oregon Treaty and being mad about this. Whigs, including Abraham Lincoln, are going to call for what they call the spot resolution. And they say, we want to know exactly where his encampment and fort was, where he was attacked. Because it matters to them. They know that if it's in Mexican territory, it's going to obviously be provoking, and that's a mitigating factor to this incident. So the Whigs aren't quite as fired up to go to war over this as Southerners are, and generally the majority of Americans, which just want new territory and are land hungry to get out to the Pacific. Well, what's going to happen? We don't have GPS or Google Earth or modern day technology of any sort. They have primitive but decently acceptable cartography, and essentially what's going to happen is the spot resolution, they run out the clock on it, get the declaration of war, and the Whigs are just kind of disgruntled a little bit. So declaration of war is given, and off we go to war. Immediately upon the war being declared, you have U.S. naval forces plus an army detachment under Fremont that just happened to be in the area, in the Bay Area, and they are basically going to occupy San Francisco and Monterey with naval support and the support of Americans who were there, who wanted to be, a la Texas, kind of get their freedom from Mexico as Americans who had been allowed to settle there, going through the same process. And what you're going to see happen is, essentially, they declare their own republic called the Bear Flag Republic, and they, declare independence. They are going to quickly have this approved by the United States. Now, you might say, well, if he has a small army detachment and a navy, why does Mexico not come back up here? Because Mexico is under duress, and attacks are going to be plunging down into the heart of Mexico, because, of course, Polk had already tried, at the time of the Oregon Treaty, to buy a chunk of Mexico as well as get the acknowledged border of Texas and California. He offered him $25 million, and it's not going to happen, okay? They refuse, and then, after we have the dispute with Zachary Taylor in the disputed territory, that's how we end up at war. So the declaration of war has happened. California becomes the Bear Flag Republic. The course of the war, not too many battles for you to know about. Zachary Taylor's going to follow down from the disputed territory into Mexico and win at the Battle of Buena Vista. General Winfield Scott's going to come down from New Orleans and win a key battle at Veracruz, and then push on to Mexico City and eventually, get into Mexico City. Fremont's forces are going to quickly kind of take control of California. And while it's kind of a slow slog and there are U.S. losses, really you don't need to know about any other battles related to this war. Just kind of understanding that, you know, it is going to take a little while. It's not like it was a 2-week war or something like that. But, and you know, the Mexican forces are going to fight ferociously in defense, but they, you know, the United States is going to subdue them and basically force a peace treaty. And for $15 million, and of course paying off what U.S. citizens claim are the Mexican damages that are owed to them, they're essentially going to get the disputed border, all of this territory in here, as well as California. And this almost gives the United States, the continental United States, a few years later in the 1850s, they're going to complete the Gadsden Purchase and add a little bit more down here in what becomes New Mexico and Arizona. The war ends with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and this takes us back to this essential question we started with. What is the impact of the new territory? Keep in mind, Northerners were bitter that they didn't get all of 5440. Northern Whigs have questioned the spot resolution. Southerners are just delirious at getting all of this territory, much of which is below the 3630 line. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with Northerners unhappy, Southerners happy, and Northerners are going to be growing in a growing amount suspicious of Southern attempts to continue to get more land. They start to call it a slave power conspiracy to get new land, and you'll see this continue with further thirsting for Baja California, for Cuba, etc., as Southerners continue to want more and more land to extend the scope of slavery. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Stay classy.